corruption. And the most important questions we are asking this morning is, whose responsibility is it? And how can stakeholders in Namibia effectively contribute to the fight against corruption? I also wanted to add my own question. Is saying no enough? That is also one of the questions I wanted to add. We keep saying no, we keep saying no, we keep saying no, but is saying no enough? Right. I have a set of questions that I indicated, and then thereafter I'll give a chance to the floor to actually pose the questions. Let me introduce my panel this morning. Right, my immediate left, Mr. Falan Masule, Chief Investigating Officer from the Anti-Corruption Commission. Good morning, sir. Welcome. Right next to him is Mr. Bradley Shongarero, Communications Officer, Civil Society Information Center in Namibia. Good morning, sir. Welcome. I think everybody must have a mic before we start. And it's on. Okay, let's just make sure all mics are on. Right next to Mr. Shongarero is Mr. John Nakuta, our Media Ombudsman. Good morning and welcome, sir. Last but not least is Mr. Joseph van der Westhuizen, Vice Chairperson or Vice Chair of the National Youth Council Board. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And now that we have introduced our panel this morning, I would like to start first with Mr. van der Westhuizen by actually first answering to our questions that we are asking this morning. Whose responsibility is it? And how can stakeholders in Namibia effectively contribute to the fight against corruption?
Thank you. I have a continuous engagement with regards to whose responsibility is it from the side of the council, but also from the side of these faith-based institutions in the country. We are all responsible. By nature, we are all corrupt. But it is our responsibility as individuals to speak up. And I've always used the phrase to say, would you blow the whistle on your own mother that you know is corrupt? Would you blow the whistle on your uncle that has made a way for you to get a job while others are in line and experience more than you to get a job? So the responsibility really lies on all of us to be able to say no and blow the whistle. And that really is to ask ourselves with regards to corruption. If it is done to us and it affects us, how would we feel? That should be the question that lays basis to how we will then react to ensuring that we address the aspect of corruption. That's just the basis with regards to the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakuta. I would like to pose the same questions to you. There you go.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I can also but just say, I don't know, this thing's okay. I can also but just say that I'll answer the question in the same way that the previous speaker did, that fighting corruption is everyone's responsibility. In fact, with reference to what we've heard from the two main speakers, the director and the representative from the UN mentioned very clearly that the effects of corruption is very corrosive. I think the director also mentioned that corruption at its very basic level is also even a threat to our democracy. And he also even mentioned that corruption affects the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the people. I cannot agree more that instead of the money to be used for service delivery, education, health, and now during the COVID times we've seen and we've learned from our neighbors, for example, shockingly one of the ministers had to resign because of corruption. Money that was supposed to be meant for COVID interventions and whatever rather found its way to academics, church leaders, all of us must fight corruption. And I cannot agree more with what the director said. It is not just the ACC's responsibility. It is all our responsibility because it affects our daily life and our existence.
Indeed, Mr. Shombalelo, the same questions across to you.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Okay.
I
I think I am audible. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bradley, as already introduced, from the Civil Society Information Centre Namibia, or Civic Plus 264. I think both Mr. Nakuta and Mr. Van der Westhuizen have outlined everything. As outlined by the UNDP Deputy Representative, the economic cost of corruption is very high. She indicated about 2.6 trillion globally gets lost due to corruption. And as indicated, this is things that could go towards service delivery and whatnot. I think if you look at how that specifically affects people on the ground, grassroots, CSOs, or civil society broadly, you will see that the people on the ground, the most marginalized people, are the ones that will suffer due to corruption. I think that's the only addition that I have to say before.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masule. Whose responsibility is this, and how can stakeholders in Namibia effectively contribute to the fight against corruption?
Okay, thank you. I think to answer to the question, one needs to look at or try to consider the effects of corruption. If you look at the question as to whether anyone who is spared from the effects of corruption. Corruption affects everyone in the country, and it's not only in Namibia. Having said that, it pushes me to answering the question as to who the responsibility is. It's everyone's responsibility. Everyone in the country, whether regardless of your level in the society, it's everyone's responsibility to fight corruption. It should not be left for the institutions like the Anti-Corruption Commission and the police. So these institutions are only there to assist in the fight against corruption. But the overall responsibility is for everyone, because if they don't fight corruption, stand up and fight corruption together, they will be affected.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masule. Again, I would like to come back to you. Looking at the theme for this year's commemoration of International Corruption Day, your right, your role, saying no to corruption. You, as a representative from the Anti-Corruption Commission responsible for somehow carrying out investigations when it comes to corruption, can you share with us the dynamics in ordinary citizens when it comes to reporting cases of corruption or alleged corruption in the country, and particularly to the Anti-Corruption Commission? Has there been an increase or decline in the reporting of cases?
Thank you. Okay, I have the statistics for financial year 2017-2018, 2018-2019, 2019-2020, and 2020-2021. If you look at the number of cases that were reported, 2017-2018, there was 325 cases that were reported. 2018-2019, 330. 2019-2020, 187. And 2020-2021 is 120. If you look at the statistics that I've done here, you can see there's a decline. From 2017 followed, there was a difference of 120, and lastly, there was a difference of 67. So there's always a decline, and that decline can be attributed to a number of factors. It's not that perhaps one cannot conclude that there's no corruption. There's a number of factors as to why there's such a decline.
Has the ACC actually looked at those factors? If you can mention some of them.
Well, there's some, one can say some of the factors some of them are positive factors, like when ACC was established, it was we did not have the public education directorate that is dealing with educating members of the public and corruption prevention. So perhaps from a positive point of view, one can say the information is reaching where we want it to reach. That is the positive part of it. One can say, yes, the information, people now understand what corruption is. And on the other note, one can also say, if you look at the type of cases that people used to report, when we started, we had a number of those petty types of corruption. But now we have those big cases of corruption. So those big cases of corruption, there are not as many as the petty types of corruption. When we started, we were investigating. We had a lot of cases of abuse of government resources.
Is that classified as a petty or a big corruption case?
It depends. It depends to the type of offense. For example, if a driver is driving, abusing the government vehicle, these were a lot of offenses that were reported to our office. And if you look at these type of offenses, gradually they are no more being reported. Other institutions have realized that they've started to deal with this matter. So they don't report them directly. It's only a few that are now being reported, but mostly the institutions have realized that no, they can deal with this type of petty types of offenses. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Mr. Van der Westhuizen, and I would like to go to Mr. Sean Barrero. The civil society actually really is in a space of, if not actually creating a common platform that can actually vigorously promote the fight against corruption. And as we have seen, the cases are actually decreasing when it comes to people reporting cases of corruption to the Anti-Corruption Commission. What role has the civil society played when it comes to fighting against corruption in Namibia so far? And also looking at what Mr. Masula has said, there are several reasons as to why people are actually not reporting these cases to the Anti-Corruption Commission. Is there a loophole, or is there something lacking in what we are doing to actually effectively make sure we report these cases, and also giving the public actually or encouraging the public to report the cases to the ACC?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think it's a really big question to answer, but I'll try to address it as best as I can. Just before coming here and reading up again on the work that civil society has been doing on corruption, I can't help but be amazed. I think one of the examples that what was it? Also, the IPPR released Civil Society Sustainability Index recently that looks at several challenges that civil society is facing within itself in Namibia. From that, you will see it's not that civil society's got the capacity to each and every single organization go out and speak to it, but you will see that through coalitions such as the Action Coalition that actually speak to the legislative framework. If you look at policies such as the Access to Information Law, I think if I just bring it home, if you look at what the UN Deputy Representative said, why are people not coming forward? Why are the cases decreasing? I think it's also a thing of it's fine, you can tell people to say no. But the thing is, do you have safeguard mechanisms in place for the people themselves? If you look at the legislative framework, you will see that in 2017, the Witness Protection Act as well as the Whistleblower Protection Act was signed, but you will still find that it's still not been implemented yet. I think those are the things that we need to look towards on the ground. Like, our people, if they come out and say no, what was it? Also, the Winca Coalition, they had a meeting. So there's a coalition of civil society organizations that actually also speak to some of these things. You will see that someone coming forward in an organization, institution, and speaking, it does affect their whole life, their well-being. So the thing is, if you've got some of these measures and we do implement them, some of these acts, I think that will be one of the ways that we can see an increase there too. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Van der Westhuizen wanted to comment actually on what Mr. Masula has said. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Look, with regards to, there's an aspect with regards to what are the issues that young people have around corruption in this country. One of the issues that young people have in this country is exactly what has been raised. If you go on social media, contrary to what people believe about social media, and it's supposedly just being a talk show, the effectiveness of social media and what people really have their voices to be heard. If you go on social media today, the language that you would hear young people speak is the toothlessness of ACC. And I think, it's a good thing to hear that ACC now has a public education directive. But one of the reasons that maybe, and that young people may be saying, is one of the reasons that cases may be dropping is because ACC has made itself distant and irrelevant to the masses. And so you have a situation where the masses do not trust the ACC. Instead of to report cases, it has been raised that while Whistleblower Protection Acts have been signed, it is not implemented. And so you have a situation that, what are the petty cases? So you might give a corruption case that affects the socio-economic of a town or of young people or of society that may be regarded as a petty case. So why would I go report a case such as that? And so that is one of the issues. But also, it speaks to an aspect of, if I report the case, does the corruption or does the case have a face? Is it because someone in the higher station is involved in this case, or is it because I may or may not know this person that there's a case? Or is it just a matter that, as the Director General was saying, that if there's no evidence, and concrete evidence, and if someone knows something to be true but does not have concrete evidence, people will not come forward. And there are a lot of issues. Some of them, corruption in this country has been institutionalized. It has become a norm. So much so, you will be in a situation that some of the institutions, even in government, would be having the language that this is the way we do things here.
Okay, so many issues and the youth actually expressing themselves, but are there any positive suggestions or recommendations that are coming from the youth, especially from your group, just to make sure, at least instead of criticizing and just putting forward issues, what can we do as individuals? What can we do as the youth to actually assist, or not even assist? We are not assisting anybody. We are trying to fight corruption as individuals. It's our right and it's our role, as the theme says.
When the language is spoken, the whistle protection legislation is taking time, ridiculously taking time. It's implementation. Implementation should be fast-tracked, but also there must be a place of meeting between what the ACC does and what stakeholders are doing. At the National Youth Council, we were saying, how do we help fight corruption? What is the avenue? What is the point of entry that the ACC has? For the National Youth Council in the region, most probably the only institution young people are able to say it. And I'm not sure what ACC may be having a sense. Young people are effectively blowing whistle without caring for what the consequences are on social media. How effective is it? Or how effective is ACC? How effective are ministries in looking out on social media what the language of the young people are? Because there are solutions there. How do we ensure that there's an avenue, a platform for that sort of thing to happen? And the Youth Council stays open for that platform to be created.
Okay. Most importantly, the platforms actually and the accessible channels of reporting. We'll come back to that again, and also looking at the Whistleblowers Protection Act as well as the protection of witnesses.
Let me just raise lastly the one point.
Okay.
And I'm glad that the Director General has raised it. So it does not come from me because I've written it down to say it, but the Director General mentioned it. So JP is not the first one to say it, Director General said it, and I'm affirming what he's saying. Corruption in this country has become legalized. Legislation, when you give power to a minister to be the one to approve some of the things, what his own prerogative as an individual, that's in itself. He chooses to do what it does, and it affects us negatively. And I'm glad that it has been mentioned. Corruption in this country has been legalized, and that's wrong.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nakuta, coming back to the media, the mouthpiece of the society and the people, actually, how is the media involved in the fight against corruption? Should we say it is fair, moderate, or they're actually doing fair enough to fight corruption as well?
Thank you very much for the question. But with your permission, I'll take a little bit of a detour and then I'll answer the question,
Please, no problem.
if that is fine. And I'm doing this so as to contextualize the role of the media. I want us to know that the media, the most important function of the media in any society is for the media to play a watchdog role. In the case of corruption, or generally, the watchdog function of the media is perhaps the most obvious when it comes to corruption. For example, the media act as a monitor of government behavior and guard the public interest by highlighting cases of maladministration, abuse of power, and of course corruption. By covering such cases, the media help ensuring accountability and transparency of government and their powerful factions. And on a day like this, I want to stress the important role that investigative journalism plays in the fight of corruption. I bought a book sometime last year. It's called No Longer Whispering to Power. It goes about the story of Thuli Madonsela. I'm not going to explain what the book is all about, but there's one, in preparation of this, there's one part that struck me. It says, one young, ambitious journalist went to Nkandla in 2009 to cover a story with the villagers there. How is it to live next to a president? Nothing to do with corruption. And then while she's doing her work and whatever, she saw a lot of activities going on around the president's village. And that attracted her attention. So much so that they found out that the construction happening around the president's village is to improve his livelihood and residence. And it turned out that taxpayers' money has been used to do that. Why do I say so? And we can juxtapose that, not even juxtapose. We've got a similar case next to the Nkandla saga, the so-called Fish Road saga, also happened by journalists attached to the Namibian and other newspapers, mentioned some years back about some fishy and, is the word fishy? It's like fishy dealings. What would be the right word?
Yeah, I think we are.
Yes, that goes on in Fish Road. About the way the allocations, fishing allocators are done, fish quotas. Yeah. The rest is history. We know a few years ago, 2 years ago, Al Jazeera had a whole dossier that prompted, with all due respect, the ACC into action, that made the highest office kind of fire action politicians. We may not like how they went about in revealing this. That's another story altogether. But we all agree that as a result of the Al Jazeera documentary, corruption is on our lips.
And that takes us to the media's investigation.
Exactly. And that is what I'm trying to say. The role of the media must be recognized. And to come very straight to your question, but it is so there's a need to build allies. And I would even go and say anti-corruption coalition with the media. That goes beyond once-off events. I'm challenging the director to institutionalize, for example, breakfast meetings, where you would use the opportunity to educate journalists about the issues that you are dealing with. I remember sometime last year, the deputy director called me as the media ombudsman. And she said, John, we are concerned how the media is divulging information to the extent that it would even undermine some of the cases that you are dealing with. I'm saying, if the idea of breakfast meetings, because it's wrong for the media to find someone wrong, we call it trial by media. That is wrong, because it jeopardizes the cases that the ACC is working on.
Investigation processes.
And it's also just unfair, because someone must be found guilty in a court of law and not by the media. So lastly, if the ICC can begin to institutionalize, build this coalition with journalists that goes beyond just having a press release here and there, but make it sustainable, make it long-term, and build a partnership. And lastly, any partnership is also having this notion of access to information. A partner does not withhold information. So the ACC is therefore called upon to proactively disclose information without obviously jeopardizing some of the cases that they are working on. Sorry, I took a little bit long, but I said I'm taking a detour to answer you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Mr. Van der Westhuizen has actually mentioned about the Whistleblower Protection Act, which is still pending, or the law which is still pending, as well as the Witness Protection Act. And also speaking to what Mr. Nakujai said and Mr. Shombarero, Mr. Masule, we would like to look at to actually achieve all these that we are discussing today. We need policies as well as systems in place and measures to be in place for our people to be able to speak up and say no to corruption. In the absence of the two, the Whistleblower Protection Act of 2017, also the Witness Protection Act, or their operationalization, that's the English, yes. How can we ensure that the it's also it's off. I think it's on.
Okay, thank you. If you look at the process of receiving complaints, which we have always advocated of informing the public. Members of the public are free to report allegations of corruption to our office. When they do report, they can choose to review their identity or remain anonymous. So that means if they remain anonymous, their identity will be withheld. We are not going to review their identity when we do our investigations. So the identity of the whistleblower will just remain with ACC. So they are protected. The members of the public, they are protected. If they want to report, they don't need to fear. They can report at any time. They can remain anonymous. And also, if you look at our act, the Anti-Corruption Act, there's a provision in our act that if people are reporting, if anyone reports corruption, and later perhaps there's a case that emanates from that report, that person who has reported, who has a belief that indeed was reporting corruption, they are protected from any criminal or civil cases that can be brought against them. So there's such a protection.
I also wanted to actually just comment as to how far is the Whistleblower Protection Act as well as the Witness Protection Act, because I know this question will actually pop up: how far and how long is this going to take? Because as a whistleblower, as much as we are protected by the Anti-Corruption Act, I need full protection actually, and I need to make sure I'm really protected, even if I stand in the court of law giving evidence, then I know I am protected and I will continue blowing the whistle without any fear.
Well, as to how far these two legislations I don't have an answer for it.
Okay.
I think it's something that falls within, it's not within our mandate. Okay. There's other stakeholders that are involved.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shombarelo, I would like to actually, as civil society organizations, you have done so much when it comes to awareness, and I see most of the civil societies are also in the roles of educating the public actually to understand how and what they can do to fight corruption. And you have also mentioned that. How can the societies or civil society organizations effectively actually further contribute to the actions or the relationships between the ACC as well as other organizations of the youth and the media to effectively, again, fight corruption in the country?
Okay, thank you for that question. From what I understand, it's about how do you incorporate all of these different stakeholders.
And bring all stakeholders together, yeah.
That's a very good question. And some of it, in terms of answering, has been alluded to what Mr. Van der Westhuizen and Mr. Nakuta indicated before. Every single stakeholder has a role to play. It's not just, although you've got the ACC as well, it's also you need coordination with other institutions there too. I think the idea that was suggested by Mr. Nakuta of having some sort of coalition, that was a good idea. I know in 2016 or somewhere around there was with the plan that was from 2016 to 2019, I think. There was a steering committee that included different stakeholders there too. From what I've read, I think the only problem there was you can't be doing work in a silo, especially when it comes to corruption. You have to report back to whichever your constituents are, whoever this, informing and including the people, taking the people with you in terms of fighting corruption. Because I think the main idea behind the event today is including everyone, getting everyone to say no. But in terms of that, we have to meaningfully incorporate everyone. And like I mentioned, like if you look at, I mean, most of the people here are aware of the state of civil society in Namibia. And if you look at that specifically, it's like there's hesitance not to, you know, you've got a new plan or policy, and then a week before, or maybe like a couple of days before, you just call civil society or whoever to come and validate whatever there is. I mean, if you're going to be going that route, you will have no ownership from all of these other stakeholders that are involved as well. So in terms of drafting these policies, how do you have those people on the table as well? How do you meaningfully incorporate their views, not just having them there as, you know, like a checkbox experiment or something? I think those are the main things I could probably say there. I think civil society is done with the capacity it has, done a good job at not only scrutinizing legislation that's there, but also releasing through, like, you know, the Action Coalition, actually releasing some commentary when you look at the Whistleblower Protection Act as well. I don't know if that's going to be realized or implemented soon, but it's actually really going to be very effective for all the stakeholders involved.
Thank you very much. Actually, most importantly, creating a common platform for everybody to actually contribute and contribute to the formation of policies, as well as contributing to other forms that are there created to fight corruption. And also, what I also wanted to ask is, are the recommendations that are made, especially by civil society organizations, really taken seriously when it comes by the ACC mostly, or the government overall, Mr. Shongarebo?
Usually what I've seen from my experience, and Mr. Halpert could also probably add later on to this during the Q&A, it's that you will see with some of the institutions that do reach out, that they actually do value the contributions that come, and they do incorporate it inside of the documents. But sometimes you will see that maybe civil society representative was there, and then you see the document, maybe when it's finally drafted or it's finalized, and you see that the input, the way it was presented, is not actually encapsulated in there. So it's a thing of, is it going to another workshop or program at the expense of doing reporting as a CSO to be sustainable, or is it going to another event where maybe something you're saying might not be incorporated? But I think that if you look at the interest groups and coalitions that have, you know, formed, like just in general, in terms of good governance in Namibia, you will see some of the work that they've done. You know, it's actually, as civil society, you're always pushing, you're always voicing on corruption. I think that's one of the rules, as Mr. Nakuta says, the whole watchdog rule. So I think that's always, civil society is always going to do that. I mean, if civil society is not included on the table, they will do it from the outside, raising their voices. So what's the better way to go about it?
Thank you. Mr. Nakuta, you have mentioned and you have given the challenge to Mr. Noah and his team to actually take up when it comes to the involvement and engaging the media regularly, and not just through press releases. What do you think needs to be done more to actually elevate the voice of the media in the fight against corruption?
No, thank you very much. Actually, I felt guilty because I took so much time.
This time I hope it will take very less minutes.
I forgot one thing, and that was actually the media is also going through sustainability issues, and there's one thing that I also would want to present to Mr. Noah and the ACC, and it's to investigate and to organize investigative journalism workshops as a way to capacitate journalists, investigative journalism, and that way you would build the kind of coalition that we are talking about. And just in conclusion, my brother Mashule mentioned that he doesn't know when the Whistleblower Protection Act,
the whistle protection specific legislation is affecting your work. Why not join forces, rally around this particular issue with civil society, and let's amplify our voices, and maybe the powers that be would realize that no, we can't delay this any longer. So that is my challenge, basically.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Mr. van der Westhuizen, I would like to ask if there's anybody on the floor who has a question and they would like to pose. And while you're preparing your questions, I would like to come back. We have questions. Do we have a mic that we can give out to the floor? We can borrow one of the mics from the panelists, maybe. We've seen a decrease in the number of cases being reported. So my question is, what is ACC doing to encourage or to prompt the increase or to prompt people to come out and report their cases? So I have a follow-up statement to say, does it mean that there are no corrupt activities going on? One of the panel mentioned that that is not the case. It doesn't mean that we do not have corrupt activities. So I'm again adding on to say, does it mean that the society or the public is shying away because of trust in the ACC, or is the reporting process not friendly? Thank you for your question. We are taking notes of that. There was another question. Okay.
Who are you? You are just a split woman like myself. Yes? This is what is happening. But corruption's face is fish rot. Fish rot, what is the word? It's to the extent that you don't want to hear it anymore if you like. Because other people are not addressed. Other people are holy cows. Some are fair game to be, put around and be seen in newspapers. Others are being hidden, and I want you to see you might put my face on your newspapers if you do.
Okay.
This
Thank you very
is
much, ma'am.
really, I want to, and this is why I came here, give me this platform.
Yes, you have the platform, and just make it a little bit brief because we are waiting
does
against
not
time.
want to. How can you hire fake people to be forensic handwriting examinations, and that is not proof enough that you have something to hide? All the administrative justice bodies in this country, they are all supporting FNB. Even the Ombuds office, if you like. Where is me? Am I not Namibia? Don't I belong to this country for my rights to be protected?
Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
good that you have spoken up, and it's you are actually in good hands because we have the chief investigating officer here as well as the director general of the ACC. Thank you very much for your contribution. The last question, please, for contribution.
Thank you, moderator. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Kunjo, and I'm from the Ministry of Health and Social Services. We can see that ACC is doing a great job, as we have seen from the statistics presented by the Director General. But there appears to be misconceptions among the members of the public that ACC is just focusing on 30 cases. Now my question is, what strategies or mechanisms does ACC or the ACC put in place to ensure that these needs are debunked, so that the public confidence is restored? I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can now give answers to the questions. Mr. Noah, I will connect to you with the questions related to the ACC, but I want to move to the youth first to give their comments on their involvement, especially when it comes to saying no to corruption, not only on social media, but also coming forth to ensure that the youth feature in the anti-corruption as well as the good governance agenda, looking also at the National Youth Policy 2020 to 2030 that is placed or put in place. Does it really push forth the rights and roles of the youth towards effective governance?
Thank you. Again, thank you. There's been inspiration on the floor, so I can get into it before I get into the question that you've asked. Very fast. Thank you, Comrade Noah, and I'm saying Comrade Noah not because of politics. I'm saying Comrade Noah because I'm used to the word, for having highlighted that. And that's exactly what we're saying with regards to power being given through legislation. That happened because someone at the top gave a special provision for that to happen because of the legislation that it speaks to. But that matter has been addressed, and it is not happening under the new leadership. And it will not happen while we are working with legislation in the National Youth Council. Having said that, the National Youth Policy that has been launched has 4 pillars. It speaks to its strategic objectives: health, education, employment creation, civic and political participation. But there's a 5th one with regards to the policy objectives, and that speaks to cross-cutting matters in the country with regards to youth development. One of those is corruption. And so the youth policy is speaking to that. But also it gives us then an opportunity through the youth policy to say, while we have footprints in all 14 regions, in all 121 constituencies, how can we effectively use that space to work together with the ACC through its public education directorate that they've set up? So that will really be the way forward with regards to the youth policy what it wants. Because the fact of the matter is, corruption in its criminality is first a crime against young people in this country because they are the majority in this country. And we cannot achieve health, education, employment creation, civic and political participation in this country with corruption on the rise as it is now. So it is within the youth policy to ensure through the cross-cutting measures to address corruption as a root cause for us to be able to have the resources to address the other 4 pillars. And really, I'm glad that the ACC has opened the floor with regards to the public education directorate. NYC remains a friend as a civil society organization because we are a non-commercial entity. We regard ourselves as a civil society organization. We've been in the civil society organization space to be effective voices. And so we will definitely be knocking on the door of the director to ensure that we are able to cascade what the ACC is doing to the regions and the constituencies. Because on the ground, where the ACC may not have a footprint, we have a footprint. And that is really where the crux of the matter of corruption is really happening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masule. I would like to come back to actually debunking the myths that the ACC is actually just focusing on petty cases, and also the concept of the ACC is a toothless, what is the word? Bulldog. It's a toothless bulldog. How can we ensure the trust actually from the people to the ACC when it comes to really dealing with all the cases, not only what is referred to as petty issues, and also looking at, I think this I will give to Mr. Noah, we can tackle on that, the appointment of the commissioners of certain organizations, especially the ACC, and the trust that people will then have into that commission. Mr. Masule.
Thank you for the opportunity to respond on that. Disagree with that sentiment saying ACC is a toothless bulldog. Mostly you should ask those people that are always claiming that we are toothless. Ask them what they report, what information did they give to ACC? They did not give any information, credible information. What we are looking for is solid information where we can immediately act. We have a number of cases where we receive credible information and we immediately react. But some information, it might look as good information, but when we try to follow the information, there's no evidence to justify our actions. We can only act if our action can be justified in terms of what? And it's also very important that, when people are reporting cases of corruption, they must try to make sure that, what they give the ACC is something that we can try to follow and get some evidence. And you get people that come and report, and once after reporting, you follow the matter, they shy away. They don't want to get involved. So where do we get the information so that we can take the matter to court? And lastly, on the concept of that we are only concentrating on petty cases, it's not true. Although we embrace the concept of zero tolerance for corruption, he will be able to fight corruption effectively.
Finally, Mr. Masule, your final words, looking at today's theme and also the questions that we have just asked, whose responsibility is it? Finally, what message do you have to the nation as we commemorate the Anti-Corruption Day today?
My final word would be that all levels of the society, please stand together, let's report corruption, let's fight corruption, and if we stand together, we will then be victorious.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shongarero, we have seen and have heard of the statistics, and so much have happened, and as you have indicated, and it's also confirmed by some of the panelists as well as the floor, that civil society is indeed doing a great job, and the Director General have also confirmed that. If anything is at all that we have learned this year, it's also that we have to evolve and innovate and be robust when it comes to doing certain things, and especially in fighting corruption. How will things be done differently from your sector or from the civil society organizations or institutions in the contributions to fighting corruption?
Thank you so much for that question. I think in terms of answering it, I'll just speak to what some civil society organizations that I've engaged with have indicated. But before I go there, some other contribution also came from the floor that specifically looked at civil society and its role, especially in terms of the new action and strategic plan that was recently released. I'm glad to hear, I don't know how true it is, that civil society has been indicated as a critical partner in terms of its implementation. I actually look forward to, I've not seen the document or gone over it, but I actually look forward to going over it and seeing what it includes on the inside. It's the same thing I said with what when you're talking about corruption and when you're speaking out against it in public, the thing is it needs to start from within your organization as well. You need to look in terms of your own compliance mechanisms, the CSO as an institution. Is your organization actually following those, or do you have mechanisms and checks and balances in place? I think if you've got those, you can speak from a place of confidence on corruption in general. I think in terms of what civil society is doing, aside from the work that I've mentioned, next year, the IPPR will also be working on a really good platform that could engage non-state actors. So that does not only include civil society, but corruption fraud engagement with CSOs. But I think overall, when I said at the beginning that it's sad to see that Mr. Van Resthuizen and Mr. No also indicated that in Namibia it seems as though corruption has been legalized. That's a very problematic statement to make, because if you do say it at that specific point, you're saying that the system or like the mechanisms in place actually lend itself towards corruption. So I think in that sense, civil society has actually played a very big role in terms of scrutinizing some of the policies and acts that have come up. I think that's it. And just as a final thing, this is just from an IPPR paper. I just want to kind of read it out. And it's in terms of the ACC's new strategy.
It's not too long, right?
Yeah, it's not too long. It's just one sentence. Any comprehensive strategy requires cooperation from all sorts of institutions and actors, ranging from citizens to private and public institutions. I also want to say I'm very upset. I don't know the details of the story that Ms. Kashipara indicated, but I'm sorry that that's your experience. But if you have unchecked corruption, you don't have proper mechanisms there too. That's what happens. The people on the ground suffer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shongarero. Mr. Nakuta, and then your final words as well. In 1.5 minutes, please.
Yeah, I promise you. A quick response before I give my summary. The Anti-Corruption Commission, the director mentioned about the weakness in the law, and it is indeed the case. There's another weakness which the gentleman at the back already mentioned, and that is our law has been almost deliberately made weak. I said it at a different platform. I want to say it because I don't have anything personal. The appointment of the director
is indeed a problem. We cannot have the president appointing such an important position. Namibia is amongst the only countries that are having that, whatever. And the other thing is also who ultimately decide on which case must be taken on. In terms of our law, and the director can help me out, that sole discretion is with one individual, and that is the Director General. Now that leaves room for a lot of things. It is too much discretionary powers vested in one person. It's not right. In conclusion, the SDGs talks about building strong institutions, not strong individuals. So what the ACC must do is really to take the bull by its horn if they want the people to support their fight against corruption. Then these weak laws must be amended. And that's one of, so today, one of the people that are not here that was supposed to be here was a member of the legislature, so that they can take the initiative to change the law. And lastly, in conclusion, the media stands ready to be the strategic ally and partner which I said we want to be. And the ideas that I gave forth, I wish they can still find an entry point into the strategic plan that the ICC is having. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nakuta. Finally, Mr. Van der Westhuizen, your final remarks as we commemorate this day. What can be done differently from the NYC or your institution to actually make sure we contribute, all of us, to the fight against corruption? And is saying no actually enough?
In my minute and 30 seconds.
You have a minute and 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Thank you. Look, the National Youth Council, through its affiliate organizations, that does not exclude LGBTI or not LGBTI, whichever political party affiliation, because all political parties, except those ones that are not affiliated, serve at the National Youth Council. All regions serve on the National Youth Council. Whether you're black or white, you serve on the National Youth Council. So it is really the only institution in the country that remains inclusive. And that institution remains committed to bringing an ally, building an ally with the ACC to ensure that we continue to say no. Because corruption is a problem now for young people. It is a problem tomorrow. It is a threat to our future, for us and our children's children. And as long as we are alive as the National Youth Council, we will continue to say no to ensure that we have a future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I understand we have a representative from the Ministry of Justice in the House who can actually assist us in commenting on the Whistleblower Protection Act as well as the Witness Protection Act. And thereafter, I'll give the floor to Mr. Noah finally. Please, you have a minute and 30 seconds as well said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and colleagues. Yeah, my name is Silas Nekunda, from the Ministry of Justice. So, as I said, I'm not authorized by my ED or by my office to say something or anything in this platform. But what I'm going to say here, I'm going to be very much careful. Not reported, or if I'm reported rather, so they might not be persuasive. So the commencement of these two legislations, they are both 2017, the Whistleblower Protection Act and the Witness Protection Act. So it's down the line 4 years now. We're still waiting for the commission of this piece of legislation, very important one. The Whistleblower Protection Office is an office within the public sector. It is not for the agency or for my ministry to ensure that they are commenced. So the public service management or also Prime Minister that are heading to that goal. So with regard to the Witness Protection Act, that is a establishment or office within my ministry. And my it is task to remain the same. So much has been done, and as you might be aware, the presidency, my ministry and my ED, they both have KPIs that derive from these two projects to ensure that their implementation will ensure that their things are made plan two, that those pillars are fulfilled. They work KPIs on those projects, which are reporting every quarter, but there's nothing yet. There's nothing to report on now. But there are challenges, there's some progress, but for those challenges, those progress that has been made, I challenge the university to approach the ET to get some answers. I know them, but I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to report it, and I think it will be fair.
Okay.
Okay.
That is the good direction. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Noah, you also said a minute.
Thank you for the presentation. Really, this is convincing. But before I comment on what you requested, I just want to clarify something so that it cannot be misquoted as well. You know, the UN representative mentioned about that cost as a global cost. That amount she mentioned of 63 trillion, 2 point something like that. It's not a national one. It's a global one. And that information was not that promised. It is on website. You go on the website, you find those figures. That's one. That is the other thing, the colleagues now is this. The issue of aggregating the numbers that we mentioned. We just finalized our annual report. Unfortunately, it has not yet been made with the Parliament because it was just presented to us by the traders a week before the Parliament went on recess. Where there we have broken down all the figures. It's there. Once the State National Assembly early next year, then definitely becomes a public document, and the information will be available to. The other thing again, okay, now I'll go to the point that you mentioned, and also reflect on what Mr. Nafutai mentioned. I in agreement with what you said. I think there is a need now because the nation has expressed itself as well about this concern. At the moment, that's what the position is, not what the law is. And the bigger thing in our case as ACC, we would not have a problem to review the issue and suggest to the authority because at the end of the day, it's not us like lawmakers to agree or not to disagree. The main concern here, issue here is that this power given to the president is in the constitution. It's not just in the anti-corruption law. It is in the constitution. It is the constitution which says that the National Assembly appoints the Director General and the Deputy Director General upon nomination by the president. What needs to be done, obviously, then, you don't just review the law without amending the constitution. It's a constitutional power given to the president. As a result, it's not within our power to do anything. On the issue of the power concentrating on the Director General to decide who to investigate or not, definitely that's the issue that we can review. That's not a problem because what already practically what we do, and the investigating officer and others who are here can agree, is that because we have a case management system, all the complaints that comes in, they don't come directly to the Director General. They go to the report center, they are loaded on the system, the head of investigation, through the person who has loaded that complaint on the case management system, recommended to the Director General, give a brief summary of the allegation, and recommend what they think is what needs to be done. The Director General only take a decision whether to agree with that one or say full investigation or there's a need for preliminary investigation, then you need to look at all information and then decide whether let's say we agree that it go straight forward for full investigation or there's a need for preliminary investigation. And that should not be a problem because coming next year we will start with the review of the law. We will suggest maybe we can come up with another way of dealing with the how it is affected. Yeah. Though I think time is not enough now for us to explain all in detail what should happen because we have some cases that are coming in just like look, there's something that needs to be acted on under operation quickly. Now there should also be ways that how decisions are made if it's not done by the you see, all the things should be taken. The other thing again, I don't want this house to go with an impression on what Johanna Kakipa said. Unfortunately, it is not our policy to mention what has been reported to ACC and so on and so on. By the Anti-Corruption, and not only by the Anti-Corruption Commission. If there are those officials here, they will know this. These are things relating to allegedly she took a loan for a house whatever from the bank. She came to us because she feels that.
Okay, I do not want this to actually be a back and forth here because this was not the platform. I wish Mr. Johanna can actually find a platform to actually propose a case for what is done outside. Please, ma'am, can you please
I only wanted to say.
yes.
I only wanted to say.
So now I have the floor. We will give you the floor, please. Yes, thank you, ma'am.
I only wanted to say we have attended to where to an extent that the former ombudsperson, I even called him as well.
Okay. I think, Mr. Noah, I think this will not be able to be resolved here. Let's end it there. Finally, in a few seconds, Mr. Noah, because we are running out of time, make your last point.
Finally, I really want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the moderators. I want to thank all the participants for this. This was very, very enriching, and I want to assure you, all these inputs and contributions and suggestions that you have made here will be taken on board by the Anti-Corruption.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Noah. Thank you so much. Our discussion this afternoon, the theme you are on to say no to corruption actually serves as a reminder to all of us, and that it's not enough for us to actually just know about corruption, but it is our right to take action, hold leaders accountable, and become integral leaders ourselves against corruption. And corruption is a serious crime that can undermine social as well as economic development in all our society, and Namibia is not an exception. So, a corruption-free Namibia starts with me, and it starts with you. I would like to thank our panelists this afternoon, Mr. Bradley Chongarero, Communications Officer from the Civil Society Information Center of Namibia, Mr. John Nakuta, the Media Ombudsman, Mr. Joseph van der Westhuizen, Vice Chairperson of the National Youth Council Board, and last but not least, Mr. Falem Masule, Chief Investigating Officer, Anti-Corruption Commission. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for actually helping us tackle some of these issues. And it is good that we have actually created a first platform, or if not the first, but one of the many that will actually come as engagements and engaging stakeholders to actually see how vigorously can we fight corruption in the country. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and that ends our discussion this morning.